I'm Andy Molinsky. I am a professor at Brandeis International Business School. I'm the author of Global Dexterity and Reach. I also consult to businesses and individuals worldwide. And today on Dov Baron's Leadership Show, we will talk about stepping outside your comfort zone in business and in global business, and why staying inside your comfort zone will suffocate your potential. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron, founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness so that you can reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. Today we're going to be taking an insider look at the contradiction of why doing business across the world doesn't mean you're actually global. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in, we're about to go full Monty. Remember, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We need your help in staying relevant, so please get yourself over to iTunes and rate, review, and subscribe to the show. Of course, we can also find us on traditional radio stations across the United States every Monday and Thursday on stations FM and AM. You can find us, for example, in 94.7 Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, just as one of the many shows. Also, you can find us on Roku TV on 24/7, where we have over 100,000 subscribers. And if you're a new listener, a big thank you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, with a potential listenership of 2.5 to 3 million listeners for every show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. And now you can even find us on Google Home and Alexa. Simply say, play Dov Baron Podcast. So thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. We really appreciate it. All right, let's strip it down, dive right in. As a leader, whether you are a CEO, C-suite leader, sales leader, entrepreneur, or leader in any capacity, you know, as companies go global, we have to make sure that our people also do. The question is, how do you prepare your people to leave their personal and cultural comfort zones and operate in the highest possible levels? How do you adapt your behavior across cultures without losing yourself in the process? Well, stay tuned because you are about to find out. Our guest today is Andy Molinsky. Andy Molinsky is a professor of organizational behavior and psychology at Brandeis University, where he's also the director of the Global Leadership Institute and the author of 2 very popular books, Global Dexterity and Reach. He's also the host of Get Out of Your Comfort Zone interview series, where he's interviewed people like Simon Sinek. He also writes regularly for Harvard Business Review, Inc.com, Psychology, and he consults and speaks with corporations around the world. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome Professor Andy Molinsky! Welcome, my man.
That's quite an introduction. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Can you live up to it?
I don't know, man.
Or have I just pushed you right out of your comfort zone?
There you go. Absolutely. No, I think that's great. I feel like it's like at one of those weddings, at least in the United States, where they announce the bride and the groom for the very first time.
Exactly. So all the chayim to you.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
It's good to have you on. So, you know, your 2 books are really about getting out of our reach, is about getting out of our personal comfort zones. Your other book is really about getting out of our cultural comfort zones. And we want to bring this together today. But before we do that, I think we need some context. So I think there's a very general understanding of the term comfort zone. And I would really like to hear from you how you class a comfort zone, because it may be different than our listener or viewer.
Yeah, and I think it's like one of those terms that you hear all the time, but I think a lot of people have different views of what it means. I think a good way to describe comfort zone that I like to describe it to people is like if you could take all the situations you face at work in your lives and put them in a couple of different buckets. There could be like the comfort zone bucket where you feel very little anxiety. You're really good at it. You're comfortable. You can kind of crawl out of bed and do it pretty easily. No worries. You kind of approach these situations easily. Then there might be what you call the learning zone or the stretch zone bucket. These are situations where it's a little more anxiety. You're a little less confident, a little less self-efficacy, but it's not something that would be in the third bucket, which would be your panic zone bucket. Those are the things that you're terrified of. And we all experience, different situations for different of us go in these buckets, right? For someone, public speaking for someone might be in the panic zone bucket. And I think it is for a lot of people.
Sure.
But over time, right, that can change. And you can sort of take a snapshot picture of your buckets at one point in time and then look 6 months down the road, especially if you've done some coaching and personal development, and what's in those buckets might change. So that's kind of I think that's the simplest way to describe what I mean by comfort zone.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you and I both have this background in psychology, so we know that people they like to be comfortable. They and very often will shy away from anything other than that which is familiar. Familiar coming from the Latin familias, meaning that family footing. So that which we grew up with, we got used to. That becomes the comfort zone. And one of the things I like to say to people is, your comfort zone doesn't mean that it's great. It means you're used to it. It might suck. You might even say it sucks, but still not be willing to leave it because it's so familiar and quote unquote comfortable. So your work is about helping people to get outside of that. But there is going to be, for many people, not for everybody, but for many people, that angst at even going into that second bucket, let alone the fear one. So,
yeah, no question. I mean, that's exactly. But so then it begs the question of why would you want to do it, right?
Exactly.
And I think it's and I don't want people to walk away thinking, oh my God, I got to step outside. I got to move everything into the stretch or panic zone bucket. No, I mean, you're going to have. I think you want to have, just like with your stock portfolio, you probably want to have a balanced portfolio, right? Mm-hmm. So you're going to have some situations that are in your comfort zone, and that's fine, right? But if you want to grow and learn and develop, especially at sort of key kind of transition points in your life, like if you're an individual performer and now you're a manager. You're a manager and now you're a leader. You're starting a company. You're leading a division. You're bringing your organization global. Like at these key touch points, to be able to succeed, you're going to have to stretch outside your comfort zone. And that's where kind of the rubber hits the road. That's where, yes, of course, it would be comfortable to retreat or maybe to say, no, I don't think I'm going to take that on. But if you do want to take it on, it's going to require probably stepping outside your comfort zone. And that's what I'm so interested in, to help people succeed, achieve their goals, some ways for them to understand how they can do it successfully.
Yeah, because we both know there's no growth in your comfort zone. And by, this is not just human beings, this is the nature of the universe. If it's not growing, it's dying. So at some level, we are psychologically, emotionally, mentally sort of devolving if we're not pushing outside of that comfort zone. And one of the things I like to say about comfort zones is, by the way, when you push out of that comfort zone, you talked about the second bucket, which is the stretch. But here's the thing you need to know about your second bucket. When you get into that second bucket and you've been there for a while, it becomes the first bucket.
Right.
So now you're comfortable with the thing that stretched you. And the thing I like to say to people around that is, and this is really going to help you a lot, is I want you to stop for a moment, because this is going to give you context for where we're going with the show. But I want you to stop for a moment and think about this. I want you to think about the thing that you do that is just so easy. You do it, it's just like Andy was just saying, you could fall out of bed and do it without even thinking about it. Now think about the very first time you did it.
Yeah.
It probably wasn't easy. It was probably in at least the stretch bucket and maybe even the panic bucket. But now you don't have to think about it. So every time you go to step out and you go, oh, remember that there's things you're doing today that you could do in your sleep that were at one time a push out.
No, I think it's a great point. I actually wrote a Harvard Business Review article about that exact idea. Like that, I think the title was something like "You're more resilient than you think." Like if you sort of rewind and think back in your life at all these transition points, you've done all these things, right? But it kind of sometimes that sense of resilience slips off us, kind of like Teflon, you know, and then we forget it, and then we approach something new, especially as we get older, and then that comfort zone feels much more alluring, and that stretch zone feels much farther away, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, you know, we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of stretching yourself in culturally.
Yeah.
Right, so let's start there, because you know, as I said in the introduction, you're a professor at Brandeis University in Boston, but you have had personal and experiential background in leaving your culture and your cultural comfort zones. You went and studied in Spain, I believe, and I believe you worked in Paris as a young professional. And I read that you kept a diary of your observations of culture. Tell us a little bit about that and how that catalyzed to this.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I always tell my students, you know, I'm their professor, but I didn't study psychology or business at all when I was in college, right? So I came at this just purely from my own interest. I was working in a small consulting firm in France in my early 20s. And I found the job really boring. We were doing customer satisfaction surveys for industrial companies, and I apologize if my sorry if the audience finds that interesting. At least I didn't find it interesting. But what I found so fascinating was the experience of doing business across cultures, like communication differences in norms and style, and I don't know the ways that you give feedback and so on and so forth. And I kept this secret diary. It was on one of those old school Mac SE computers, like those little boxy Mac computers. I had a little secret file that sort of ages me. It dates me at least. I had this little secret file sort of writing down all my observations just from what I noticed. I was so fascinated by it. I come back to the United States and I'm trying to figure out, what is this? And I learned this was psychology, social psychology, organizational behavior, and I just wanted to know more. So that's when I went off and got a PhD, and you know, and so actually for my PhD research, I did the reverse. I was in the U.S., but I was studying people who were adapting to U.S. culture. So I had it from the other end, and then for my PhD studies, I studied people adapting to the U.S. culture. So kind of both sides, and you know that sort of kicked off my interest in this idea of stepping outside your cultural comfort zone.
Yeah, it's a really interesting, you know, that it's interesting that you were pulled into it.
Oh, yeah.
Which is very cool.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I think about global dexterity, and, you know, we talked about in the beginning, going global, leaving your cultural comfort zones, and I don't think that, I would put it to you, and I want to hear your feedback, that one's cultural comfort zone is something that we're often blind to until we're in another environment. Do you see it that way too?
Absolutely. I think for most people, right? Yeah. For most people, I would say that's true. That you don't even realize that you don't even understand your culture, and sometimes don't even understand your identity as someone from your culture until you're in another culture. Like I never thought of myself as American until I lived in France.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I also never understood sort of the default ways that I acted in how they were sort of unique until I observed and experienced other people's ways of being. And so there's no question about that.
So how do we, let's go to this for a minute. So how do we get the team member to create that awareness that you are likely, you're likely to be blind to your own cultural bias, and you're likely to be judgmental of somebody else's culture without making them wrong and allowing them to have a reasonably easy transition, because some cultures are very, very different. Particularly if you grew up in North America.
Yeah, no question. And there, it's easier for some people from, like, if you're Dutch and you're working in the United States, it's easier. If you're from, Korea and you're working for the United States, could be harder.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it depends on your background, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you went to college in the United States and then you came back, so it all
Different,
depends.
yeah.
I mean, so I spend a lot of time on the question that you asked. I do consulting and training and teaching and coaching and writing and so on and so forth. I mean, I think it has to happen, throughout the experience. I think you can prep people ahead of time, and there are a lot of great resources, my book, but others as well,
Sure.
To prep people. But when you're prepping before having experienced something, it's a bit hypothetical, right? It's sort of like teaching undergraduates business and leadership, and then having never worked before, right? It's a little bit like that. But I think it's still important, right? And then when they start to have the experience, to then have a way of, it could be in a lot of ways. It could be coaching, could be offsites. There are a lot of ways that you can sort of connect with people as the experience is going on, and that's where the ahas come in, right? The ahas come in. That's why that person on my team who's German, I thought they were a total jerk, but they just have a different, style of directness than I do. When they give feedback, they don't give a sandwich approach to feedback. They don't tell me how great I was and so on and so forth. They just get cut right to the chase. And before I attributed that to them, how they were so mean or they were a jerk, I didn't like them. But now I get the cultural difference, right? I think those ahas sort of in the context of actually living and working and interacting are quite powerful, right? So it's before and during and then after, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that particularly when you go to I've traveled a lot, you have, and I've lived in different cultures, and it's quite, it's quite easy to get irritated because of your own cultural bias. He's saying, so for instance, traveling in Asia, example, Thailand. When we traveled in Thailand, I re-nicknamed it Lyland. And people said, why did you call it Lyland? Because no is not an option. Ask a question, it's culturally not okay to say no. Right? So, can you have this ready for me next on Tuesday? Yes, because I can't say no. No is not an option in serving. So I have to ask other questions to find out whether that's actually true. And then, but if you're coming at it from our bias of the Western world, you go, this person's a lying bag of poo and they've got no integrity. But no, they're just culturally, they're not allowed to say it. Or you say to an Indian person in India, do you understand? Oh, yes, I understand. And you're looking at their head and you're going, they're saying no. No, that is yes in India, right?
Right. And they're subtle signals. They call them, I think they call them high context and low context cultures. And so, Thailand would be a high context culture where you really need to read the context and understand the subtle signals to be able to interpret a message versus a low context culture where you just say what you mean, right?
Exactly.
And if you come from one of those cultures, it can be very challenging.
Absolutely.
The big caveat here, though, I have to say, is that in the world of Fortune 500 companies, global organizations, and so on, you don't just have locals, right? You have cosmopolitans. Yes. You have people who grew up in, who have a Portuguese mother, an Indian father, went to boarding school in Switzerland, went to university in the UK, business school in the US, and now working in Argentina, right? So they probably speak more of a global corporate language in a sense and are more flexible. So you've got locals and cosmopolitans. So it is a mistake in some ways to paint with these broad brushes, but at the same time, there's a grain of truth to it. So you have to be nimble even in the way that you interpret what you're seeing when you do business globally.
But again, I think that, when you're looking at that context, then we have to come back to, for me, if I'm working with the team, my first question is, how many of you have lived abroad?
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't ask you if you went on holiday, because staying at the Marriott in a foreign country is not a cultural shift. Right? So have you lived in another country? Have you lived in another culture? Because if you haven't, you are about to be shocked when you're in a country where washing the dish is a bowl of dirty water before they feed you. And so you're like, well, that's disgusting. Or where you go to the bathroom and there's no toilet paper. because there's not in most countries.
Right, yeah.
Like, most people are like, there's no toilet paper? No, most countries don't have toilet paper. And then I talk to them and they go, but that's ridiculous. They must have, well, no, they don't. They don't have it. They don't have it in many countries in Europe. They certainly don't have it in countries in Asia. Like, oh my God. And I mean, I think that this is what I'm saying about the cultural shock.
Yeah.
Right? And a lot of people go into that as a cultural shock because they're carrying that bias forward.
Yeah, no question. And what I found also really interesting is that lately I've been doing a lot of writing and also consulting with organizations on global virtual teams, which adds a different dimension to it.
Yes.
Because this is not someone moving physically to another culture. This is this is the process of globalization on the ground. Companies going global, but sort of leveraging local talent. So you have a global virtual team. So you're not literally moving to another culture. You might have offsites periodically,
right.
But so the experience is like what we're doing right now, but with multiple people, and that's really challenging too.
So talk to us a little bit about that, because I think that's probably even more relevant, because in those kind of situations, I think it's even easier for me to carry my bias. Because I can go, well, this conference is Rome, and when in Rome, etc. But it's not. It's a global conference, and particularly as a leader, I've got to remember that. So talk to us a little bit about that, how to handle that, and what are some of the things that people are going to bump into, and how to maybe work with it a little bit.
Yeah, so lots of challenges. You've got the challenge of building trust on a global virtual team,
Absolutely.
A challenge of building sort of unity, feeling that you're part of the team. You've got the natural us versus them sort of dimension that you often see. Depending on, of course, it depends on what who's on the team, right? It very often can split into us them. You've got the problem of the most remote peripheral employees. So it's very, very common that, let's say there's a global virtual team that's headquartered in Chicago, but then you've got someone in London, someone in Greece, and then someone in Singapore. That person in Singapore is on conference calls 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, every night.
Yes.
And their family life is impacted and so on and so forth. And people just don't really get it. They kind of get it, but don't really get it. Now, that person in Asia might also then have a cultural difference in terms of the ways that they would give feedback, right? You said the no thing that you talked about before, directness. So they feel caught because they're not able or comfortable. They want to save face. They don't want to necessarily be direct, especially to the leader. So you can understand like all the challenges here in trying to get that team really to gel and work together well, and they're all disparate, and none of them really fully understands each other, their location, or their full set of responsibilities outside the team.
Yeah.
That's hard, right? That's hard.
That's a lot of balls to juggle, right?
Oh yeah. I think that's what you're seeing a lot. And so I've been I'm actually right in the process now of writing a Harvard Business Review article. By the time this airs, it probably will have come out
right.
about this topic. And I write a lot about this. I do some consulting as well, and I think it's a real legitimate challenge for a lot of experienced managers.
Well, you've developed a methodology for turning knowledge about cultural differences into a better adapted behaviors. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think we need to sort of, everybody's get clear now what the problem is.
Yeah.
Now what? Now what the hell do we do?
Well, so it depends. If we're talking about, how to manage a team, that's one thing. And then there's also the question of how to adapt and adjust your own behavior across cultures. So my book, Global Dexterity, was helping people learn to adapt and adjust their own behavior across cultures.
Right.
And so that process, which I teach, which I consult with, coach with, and I'm actually creating an online course to help people with as well, is understanding there are different steps, simple steps, but I have a way of diagnosing what the cultural differences are in a very simple but clear way between how you need to act in the new culture and how you would act. So where are your pain points? I think that's the first step. Where are the pain points for you in terms of trying to adapt and adjust? Like, why is this in your stretch or panic zone? Like, why specifically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the other key key that I find that is really, really, I find useful for people is to realize that they typically have more, leeway to customize or personalize how they act in a specific culture. So I'll give you a visual here. I don't know where, like an archery target like that.
Yep.
Right. So I think oftentimes people think that you have to hit the bullseye of the archery target
right.
when you're adapting across cultures. When in Rome, act like the Romans. But the reality is that there's more leeway in that archery target, right? There's more leeway to find, it's a metaphor, to find a place in the new culture where you can sort of adapt but also be yourself. So make a little tweak, make a customization. I talk to people about fusion cuisine, like the idea that you can have a burrito but then put kimchi in it and you have a kimchi burrito. Like there are ways to kind of fuse and create hybrid versions of something that's natural and authentic and comfortable to you, but also works well enough in the new culture. And that's sort of the art that I find in global dexterity and adapting behavior across cultures. Then, of course, there's a process of trying it out, see how it works, adapting, adjusting, practicing, and so on and so forth. But that's kind of the core.
You know, as you say this, something that comes up for me in two forms. You are a professor at a university. And this whole, in my opinion, it is my opinion, that's all it is, craziness around not offending people, because it's, university used to be the place of the outspoken, and it now seems to be the environment of snowflakes. I'm not saying that's true at your university, but people who are afraid of offending anybody in any way, shape, or form. But I believe that, again, I'm not saying it's true, and I'm looking for your input. But if you are going to be have global dexterity, if you're going to go out of your comfort zone, you have got to embrace that you're going to screw it up. You've got to embrace that you are likely to offend somebody, and that your responsibility is to adjust your behavior once you know. But if you go out with the fear that I can't offend anybody, then I don't know that you're going to do anything. You're right.
I fully agree with you on that. I mean, the university issue aside, I think there's a lot of debate about that one. But in terms of offending people, the news flash is that you're going to make mistakes, right?
Yeah.
When you adapt across cultures. The key, I think, is to have a forgiveness strategy. You have to it's funny. I find that there are a lot of things that you can do to try to sort of like cut yourself slack in a way, get
right.
slack cut for you. It's sort of like the idea that when you go to a grocery store, and have you ever seen like cashier in training, or when you're driving your car and it says student driver, right? Like, how do you sort of tell someone that, you're trying here,
right.
you care and you
right.
respect their culture,
right.
you want to learn more about it, and you're open to feedback and so on and so forth. I mean, I think that's the attitude that you want to have. You also want to be authentic, and that's why I talk about the fusion and the hybrid. You don't want to suppress who you are. If you suppress who you are, it's not going to work for anybody, right?
No.
It's not going to work for anybody. I think most people realize that if you're well-intentioned, if you're curious, if you're respectful and interested in their culture, I think they'll cut you slack, especially if you have a bit of a foreign accent.
Yeah, I think that, I think there's having traveled a lot as you have, you start becoming aware of their view of us.
Yeah.
So I'm British born, but I lived in Australia for many years before I moved to North America. So my accent is unmuddled, and it'll depend on who's listening to me, how they'll hear it. But one of the things that I've noticed is that oftentimes, particularly first world, we tend to be quite arrogant about our culture, and we want to make it right. And I think that one of the greatest things you can do, I said this when I was traveling as a young guy traveling, is learn hello, goodbye, thank you, please. If you learn those things, right, everybody will forgive everything. I taught my daughter how to say hello in 11 languages, and most of those languages, that was the only thing I knew. But just that, it like allows people to go, okay, you're not an arrogant North American, you're not an arrogant Brit. It's so powerful, isn't it?
I agree. I think, some people might say it's superficial, but I don't. I agree with you. I think that it shows that you care. I have a great example of an executive. He's an executive. He's born in the United States, but he was doing a lot of work with a company in the Canadian part of, the French-speaking part of Canada. And he had to give a big keynote there to maybe 500 French-speaking employees. And he went up there and he practiced for weeks, and his French was awful. But he went up there and spoke like third grade French. Sure. And people were like beaming. That he also tried to play hockey, and he's a terrible skater. And you know what I mean? Like, it shows you don't have to, those are faux pas right and left in a sense, but you're showing that you really are trying. And I think that gets you so much more than just sort of like hitting the mark perfectly, that sort of bullseye we talked about.
Yeah, I think, this is one of the things that I talk a lot about, the power of vulnerability and how valuable that is. And the vulnerability of willing to show up, muddle through it, and fully own I am muddling. I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but I'm going to try because I care and I'm curious to know more.
Yeah,
it makes such a massive difference in the way people are with you, and that humanity, that vulnerability is so endearing. That guy getting up there and speaking third grade French as the big boss,
exactly,
is so like, oh, I love this guy.
Yeah,
exactly. I love this guy. We've all seen it even with, big business people, and we'll see them on an interview, and they'll say something, and they'll talk about how they blew it, and they were really crap at something, and we suddenly go from holding them on a distant pedestal where they're unapproachable to eye level, and we feel like we've connected with them. This is the power. I think that this is one of the great keys in building global dexterity. Is this a willingness to be a buffoon, willingness to screw up?
I can't agree more. I mean, you could think about it. Think about a range of different people considering what he considered to do, and I'll bet you many people wouldn't do it.
Oh, absolutely not.
They would say, "I will look like a fool. I'll be so embarrassed." And so on and so forth. But, I agree with you. And sometimes it's easier said than done. But that's part of taking a leap. That's part of stepping outside your comfort zone.
Yeah, I had a presentation actually this time last year in Montreal, in Montreal, which of course is French speaking. And I was, they announced me. I went up. I said, "Bonjour, comment ça va?" And they all answered me. And I went, "That's the end of the French." And everybody just cracked up. And it was great. Because I actually can say, "Bonjour, comment ça va?" with a very good, strong accent. Like, I might actually know what the hell to say next. That's the end of the French.
They appreciate it.
Yeah, and at the end, the only thing I said, and here's my third word, merci.
There you go.
So it's so like this. I think that's one of the great lessons we can say to these people is like, grasp that. So let's now shift it back into the context of your book, Reach, which is about getting out of your comfort zone. Because in many ways, I think the global dexterity is a metaphor. Wouldn't you agree? That it's a metaphor for personally getting out of your comfort zone. So let's talk a little bit more about that, about pushing outside of one's personal comfort zone. We talked about that's where the growth happens. What's some more of the guidance from your book, from Reach, around that and what we can do?
Yeah, so for that book, I expanded. I talked with executives, managers, and then I went broader. Mm-hmm. Doctors, priests, lawyers, all sorts of people, students, actors, So in the situations, by the way, are pretty varied. So, and as we talked about the buckets before, so one example I open the book with is a woman who was a young entrepreneur, and she started a company and ended up having to fire her best friend from that company a couple of months after she started it. Outside her comfort zone.
I would say.
I have examples of people who struggle being assertive, standing up for themselves, having difficult conversations, delivering bad news, pitching and promoting themselves, public speaking, making small talk with people they don't know. I mean, the list goes on, and it varies. Like for you, it might be, oh, that's easy. For someone else, it's like, that's terrifying, right? So a whole range. So what I found in that book is I kind of like built upon and expanded what I found in Global Dexterity, but made it broader. So the first piece of that book, the first piece of what you can learn from that is to understand what the challenges are in the first place. And I got a little bit more specific in that book about what the core challenges are. Is it authenticity that you struggle with? Is it competence? Is it, where is your vulnerability? Like, where specifically is that vulnerability? And if you can understand where that vulnerability is, you can start to take efforts to try to address it. And in terms of efforts, I focus on the first one that I found, and it popped up time and time again. I did about 75 interviews for that book. The first thing was conviction, which shouldn't be surprising. Mm-hmm. The idea you have to understand what's in it for you. Like at a real deep level, like why do you care about this? Why does this matter? Sometimes it's professional, sometimes it's personal, sometimes it's a mix. Why is it important for you to step outside your comfort zone in this particular case? Why does it matter? It's funny, I was reflecting on my own experience, and I started to realize that for me, it's often very personal. It's professional, too. I want to succeed professionally, but often it's very personal. I have 2 kids. Now they're 11 and 13, and I'm often coaxing them outside their comfort zones, in an age-appropriate way. Like trying an activity where they don't know someone or something like that, right? But then I think to myself, I'm asked to do something, and I have this impulse of like, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. But then I start to think about my kids and am I practicing what I preach? And so that ends up being a huge engine for me, just personally in my life. But whether it's personal or professional, it's like, or a combination. Find and embrace that source of conviction. Why do you care about it? Because that's a very powerful engine. Because again, you're going against the grain of your personality, of your habit, and so on. So you need that push. That's one.
Can you think of a specific example of when you've really been pushed out of your comfort zone, maybe even into the third bucket of terrified, where you've had to go there?
A lot. I mean, I think public speaking is a big one for me. Mm-hmm. So early in my career, I was really afraid of public speaking. I was the kid in college who would sit in the back of the class. My cheeks would get red. My heart would beat. I feel like it's like pounding out of my chest. Just I was even speaking in class. This is not like public speaking. Right. And then sort of as I became a young professor, a young faculty member, actually my first job was at the University of Southern California, USC in LA, and I was asked by companies to give keynotes. I was young. I didn't know anything. I had never given a keynote before. It was like 25 years ago. I didn't know what the hell I was going to talk about. I was terrified of it. I remember them calling me. I remember Fox actually once called me, not because I was so great, but I think because I had that role. I was a professor at business school and so on. And they asked me, and I remember they said something like, are you free October 15th to, do this keynote to so-and-so? And so I look at my calendar, totally blank, nothing on it. And I'm like, I lied. I was like, you said the culture of lying. I lied. I was like, I'm really sorry. That's just not going to work for me. Like praying that they wouldn't say like, oh, we're pretty flexible, the 13th. So I was avoiding left and right. And then I had to step into an MBA classroom. MBA classrooms can be terrifying. One of those pointed classrooms going down with these students, sort of sharkish, sort of aggressive, students. Yeah, I know that they're not young. They're professionals and so on. So I was really uncomfortable with all this stuff. I wanted to be successful at doing this. I wanted to be able to, communicate my ideas to people. I never got into academics just to communicate to other academics. I got into it to try to make a difference in people's lives and in the world, to almost use academics as R&D to try to then make a difference. And I knew public speaking was going to be critical for me to do that. So I went to step number 2. So we talked about conviction. Step number 2 is what I in the book I call customization. Find your way of doing it.
Right.
And what tools can you use to sort of customize your experience? And I started to do that. So one example, I started wearing this ring. And this is going to sound crazy, but and I wish I had it with me today. And it's interesting, I don't, because I don't wear it anymore, because I have kind of grown out of it. But it was a ring. The ring is a tiger's eye stone that my great uncle found in the beaches of the South Pacific in World War II. And he brought that stone back, had it made into a ring, and I always admired it as a kid. And then it's really cool looking. And then when he got Alzheimer's eventually, and I inherited the ring. His wife knew I had admired it, and then I started wearing it, and I started learning about where he got it and so on, and it started to represent courage for me in a way.
Right.
And so whenever I went to give a speech, in those days it was mostly speaking in an MBA classroom, but starting to do research presentations or even some small sort of keynote style speeches, I would wear the ring. And it wasn't like a magic potion, but it just reminded me that I can do this. If he did that, I can do this.
Right.
I would also, other things I would do, I would go early. Anytime I gave a speech, I would always go early, and I would check out where this was going to be. I would meet a few people, and then all of a sudden I'm not speaking to a group of strangers, which was more intimidating to me. I'm now speaking to a group of strangers, but a couple of people who I've already met.
Right.
You know what I mean? So like we could go on and on, but I learned to sort of realize I had more power than I realized or knew to kind of tweak the experience a little bit to make it feel like a little bit more comfortable for me. And then combined with a conviction that I had, it kind of pushed me to try it. And that's one of the biggest epiphanies I talk about in the book, that you're never going to grow and learn and develop unless you actually try it. Because when you try it, you can learn, and you can learn about yourself. And what you can learn, and what I keep hearing time and time again when I work with people, is you often learn, number one, I'm better at this than I thought I was.
Right.
Number two, this isn't as bad as I thought it was. Right? And when you feel those things, that's going to nudge you. If there's door number one, which is avoid, door number two is try it, that's going to nudge you to door number two. And when you go to door number two, you'll sort of start to develop that confidence. And that's how you get something outside that panic or stretch zone and towards your comfort zone. It's a process, though.
Yeah, I fully agree. One of the things that I say with my clients is, I know you're terrified. That's okay.
Yeah.
We all go through that. But let me ask you this question. Why does it matter? Why does it matter to you? Doesn't matter why it matters to me, but why does it matter to you? How will you, and then once we find that out, how will you feel? Knowing it matters like that, if you don't do it, how will you feel?
Yeah.
If you do it and you make a balls of it, how will you feel? And which of those two feelings is worse? Having done this thing that really matters and ballsed it up, or having not done it at all? And one of the things I say is, because potential is nothing more than the buoyancy of a coward. You get to have the buoyancy of the possibility of you could have been great, but you didn't quite do it because you're fantasizing about it when in fact you're stuck in your fear. But if you step into it, you probably will screw it up, and that's okay because you can go back and you can do it again. And there's such power in that, deciding why it matters. And this is the thing, is that we often look to someone else, and you look at Dov and we go, well, it's speaking so easy for you. Well, it's easy for me because I've been doing it 34 years. I'm well practiced at doing it. I've been doing it longer than a lot of people in my audience have been on the planet. So yeah, it's easier. But you know what? I still get nervous. But why I'm doing it, that hasn't changed. So when I'm feeling a little bit of tweaking in the underpants, I'm still gonna go, you know what? I'm getting on the stage because I know that I'm there to have that impact, to make that difference. And I think it's, you bring up a very important point, is why am I going to do it? And the only way to get better is to do it.
Yeah.
It's vital for us to all grasp that at a much bigger level. When you go into companies and you work with them, what are you doing with actual companies?
Oh, I'll tell you in a second. One, I couldn't agree with what you just said, because I think that people often misunderstand courage. That courage isn't the absence of fear; it's taking action despite the fear. I mean, I just wanted to underscore that. It's absolutely what you said. So companies, what am I doing with companies? A lot of different things. As I transition to doing that more, I'm doing consulting, a lot of consulting with global virtual teams. I do keynotes. I'm starting an online course very soon that I'm about, let's say at this point, 95% done with. And it's actually, this is a perfect discussion because it blends the two concepts of comfort zone and global dexterity. So those are the main things that I do.
But specifically, what are you doing with these companies? When a company brings you in, what are they asking you for guidance, help, training in?
It depends. It's usually about some aspect of global work. So, for example, it might the engagement might involve developing an offsite. And then sort of an offsite experience for a global virtual team, let's say, but then building off that offsite, there'll be a keynote probably within that, and then there'll be sort of a plan for going forward, and also a way to assess how we're doing based on what we talked about. And then from there, sort of, kind of taking it in a stepwise progression. That would be an example. I love those kinds of engagements. Well, I mean, I like the speeches too, but those are more one-off. You kind of swoop in and swoop out. But those can be impactful too. It's nice to be able to I do plenty of sort of live and also virtual keynotes, and those are nice too. You don't have as much of a talk about meaning, you don't have as much of a chance to make a difference. I think what you can do in that case is you can kind of open people's eyes to something that they didn't really think about before, but then to actually create the change, that's what I find most satisfying. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly why I'm doing this online course. I created it for that purpose. It's going to be available to individuals. That's not companies per se at that level, right. But then I'm also going to be bringing it into companies and offering it to companies as something that their people can use to learn to step outside their comfort zone and create a blended version where there's some live and some virtual and so on and so forth. So that's that. So I'm a bit of I wear multiple hats. I'm a professor by day and I guess a consultant by not night, but I don't know.
In the off hours.
In the off hours. Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of the work that I do is around, in the broad sense, authentic leadership. But what it really means is purpose-driven leaders building a purpose-driven organization to have greater impact. One of the things that I'm always looking for is what do you see as the soul of leadership for you? What is that the soul of leadership for you?
My own or others, or the soul of being a leader?
Yeah, the soul of being a leader.
I think it's about really caring about something. I think because I mean, responsibility is a big part of being a leader, because oftentimes people before they're leaders are individual performers, and you're responsible only for a very narrow segment. And then when you become a leader, you become responsible for so much more. Yes. And you become responsible for the business, for profit and loss, but you also become responsible for many other people's livelihoods, let's say, and so on and so forth. So there's responsibility, but I think that beneath that, there's I don't know how I would articulate it. I've never really thought about this before, to be honest, but something about this idea of meaning in that it matters to you. Yes. I mean, I think that's that's at the heart of it. That's the soul, that it matters to you. It matters. And I think that drives you, and it also impacts whether people are going to follow you or not. I think I don't know. Is that a you've thought about this more than I have.
It's your answer, not mine. So I don't
know. I'd have to think more about it, but that's what I think about. Right. That's off the cuff. That's what I think about.
And that's really what we're looking for here. When it's sort of going on that sort of off the cuff stuff. what is some, you're a leader, you're guiding leaders as well. What is something, I think, particularly as you get a little bit older, we get smart enough to realize that we're always in a learning curve. And oftentimes there are things we're learning in the realization that we used to do something that we thought was really good, but it actually was the thing that was holding us back. Do you know what that was for you? What it was that you were doing, that you were focused on, you thought was great, but now you can go, oh my God, that was actually blocking me.
Well, I think for me, maybe it used to be sort of the perfectionist tendency of getting everything just right before kind of unveiling it to the world. Mm-hmm. And that could be in all sorts of ways. It could be in an academic article. It could be in a blog. It could be in a book. It could be anything, really. I realize for me that it's important to that the only way to truly make progress and make an impact and then enable me to create the meaning that I want to be able to create in others' lives and in the world, so to speak, is to be able to put something out there vulnerably, get the feedback that, oh gosh, that's not working, but then to take that feedback not as sort of a view that I'm a failure, but as data for improving what I need to improve. And then to kind of iterate in that way. And I think that's a very different mindset. And until I was able to develop more of that kind of mindset, I think I was sort of tighter and less creative and less impactful. And now with that more mindset of being able to put stuff out there, see how it works, be very mindful of the feedback, treat it as data, not as sort of a personal reflection of me, and then iterate. I think I'm much more sort of creative and productive.
Yeah, I like the saying, perfect is the enemy of done.
Right, there you go.
Yeah, it's like, if you're trying to get it perfect, you are never going to get it done.
Right, yeah.
One of the things that I believe, it's my belief, again, it's not the truth, it's my belief. The word has a negative connotation for most people, it doesn't for me. But I believe that the most successful people in the world are obsessed. They're obsessed with something. And whatever that something is, and I frame it as in you're at a social, you're talking to somebody over here, but over there you can hear a conversation about the thing you're obsessed with, and you actually have to leave this conversation and go over there. There's a movie, and it's some part of that movie has the bit in about you're obsessed, and that's the bit about the movie that you talk about. What is Andy obsessed with?
So I know exactly what you're talking about, and that was my experience in writing both of my books. Mm-hmm. I mean that's what I love, actually, that immersive process. I don't get it when I write a blog. I don't get it when I do sort of a quick thing. I get it when I immerse myself. I sort of like, it's almost like an anthropologist, sort of like diving in, mm-hmm. And that's where I get obsessed. And so, like, writing, I think it's actually ironic because I hear from so many people that they hate writing books or that they didn't write their book. Right. I mean, so I write everything, and I love it. I mean, I can't tell you, I want to write book number 3, and that's when I get obsessed, because I'm just so in it, and it feels so, I don't know, it doesn't feel blah, it's the opposite of blah, and I'm just really super, super engaged. So that's what it's been. It's been a year or and a half or so since I had that experience, though, because my book came out about a year ago. And, I'm kind of looking for the next thing. I think what sort of fulfilled that for me a bit has been creating this online course. That has been a fantastic experience, but it's not quite the experience of writing a book. So I think that's what it is for me.
And definitely writing a book, we've both written several books, and it is all-consuming, and for some people that's horrible.
Yeah, I know.
And for other people it's blissful, because and I know for me, I mean, part of my studies was I traveled the world to study with different spiritual teachers. I studied religious philosophy around the world before I studied psychology, before I got into leadership psychology and all those other things that I got into. But I started out there, and people go, but how did you learn all those things? It's easy. I was immersive. And they go, what do you mean? I lived with the Buddhist monks. I lived with a Gnostic Catholic bishop. I lived with rabbis. I lived with Buddhist monks. I just lived in it. Ate, slept, lived, breathed, ate it. And then I immersed. And then people say, well, but what stuck with you? That's right. It's whatever stuck with me. That was what was aligned with me. And it has given me, interestingly enough, it has given me cultural dexterity in that I can literally walk into a mosque and feel comfortable. I can be in a synagogue and be comfortable. I can be in a church and be comfortable. I can be in a gurdwara and be comfortable, because it's given me that immersiveness is I'm actually going to know something that's going on. Even if I don't get the entire thing, I'm going to be the CEO who says, bonjour, comment ça va? And that's the end of my French. But there's something about immersing that gives us that. And it's that tentative sort of toes in the water thing that actually causes the problems, I think. I think we've got to dive in, we've got to fall on our face and be willing to do that. And when you do, there's things that are going to stick with you. There are things that and I'm sure this is true for you too. I'm sure there are things that have stuck with you from Spain and from France that you still do today, that are still with you, that have become a soupçon of French, a soupçon of Spanish culture that has flavored Andy today.
Yep, no question.
And yeah. I think we often get so tight in thinking that this is who I am. Identity is very binary, and human beings are not. This is right, this is wrong, this is who I am, this is not who I am. Hold on a second, humanity is not binary. Human beings are not binary. We are multifaceted diamonds. There's such immenseness to us. And only by allowing myself to see this shitty side of this particular gem that's covered in crap and be willing to scrape it off, that I'm going to see another bright facet. But I've got to be willing to dig off some of the crap sometimes.
I like that. I like the image.
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject for me. I'm really glad we've gotten to share it. Before we finish off, what would be, as we get towards the end, if you get to give our viewers, our listeners, one piece of practical advice, one piece of practical guidance that they can put into action, preferably in 24 hours, but certainly the next 5 working days, what would be that practical advice you'd want them to walk away with and put into action?
Sure. I imagine that for people who are listening, you've from this conversation, you've been thinking about situations outside your comfort zone. So one practical exercise I like to do with people is to take a piece of paper and think about the situation that's probably in your stretch zone or maybe in your panic zone, but probably your stretch zone, the edge of your stretch zone. And, take a piece of paper and fold it in thirds like that. And on the top part of the paper, talk about, what's the worst case scenario? Mm-hmm. Absolute worst case scenario. In the middle, what's the best ideal case scenario, like the perfect way that this situation will unfold for me? And then the bottom, what's the most realistic version of this scenario? And literally fill it out. Right. That's something you can do in the next hour, not the 24 hours or 5 days. And I find it really helpful for people because I think it helps people stop catastrophizing and thinking of the worst case scenario. And in fact, if you want to sort of add the extra bonus to this exercise, write down a percentage likelihood for each of those 3. Mm-hmm. The worst case, the very best case, and the realistic case. Write a percentage likelihood, 0 to 100. And I find that when people do this exercise, it helps kind of just center them a little bit. Yeah. And I think increases the odds that they might actually, try this out as opposed to being so wallowed in their fears. So That's your practical exercise.
That's really great. It's been fabulous, Andy. Thank you so much. Thank you for everything that you've shared. Please tell our viewers, our listeners, where they can find out more about you and all the resources that you have with your courses and your books and etc. Where can they go? Is there a central place?
Yeah, central place would just be my website. It's www.andymolinsky.com. It's and my name is spelled ANDY MOLINSKY. I imagine you might have show notes or something where you can find that, and then from there I have all sorts of stuff. But that's the hub, so that's the best place to come.
Well, we'll definitely put that in our show notes, and so people will be able to get a hold of you. And as Andy said, his books are out there too. We will put links for those as well, so you can grab a hold of those off Amazon or wherever it might be. Andy, it's been a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your energy and all your great resources with us. We sincerely appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. And for you, dear listener, remember that the research consistently shows that the biggest challenges facing even the most successful companies can be somewhat counterintuitive, in that these fast-growing companies often hit a point where they realize that they're spending a fortune attracting, training, and developing talent, only to have them leaving them at a scary rate. If you're sick of investing in training and developing your talent, only to have them leave you before you got your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, providing the concrete soft skills to get you and your organization to the top and keep you there. Why? Because you cannot outsource authenticity. Also, remember to stop by the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. You don't need a triple W dot, just matrix.fullmontyleadership.com, and get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool. If you had to assess yourself in the 5 areas of leadership, it's valued at $197. You get it absolutely free for being a regular listener to our show. Remember, we always need your help in staying relevant, so get yourself over to iTunes and Spotify and all those places. Rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And remember, you can also get us on Alexa and Google Play. Just say, play Dov Barron's podcast. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about what exists outside of your comfort zone that is just going to make your life so easy when you look back 5 years from now. Remember, the thing you're doing today that's really easy was once very difficult. Now imagine the thing that looks so challenging, how easy that will be when you look back at that, and how much your life will have grown and your leadership will have gotten better. I'm Dov Barron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach the next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.